decreased during the COVID-19 pandemic? Let's pull that down, Junior.
Got it.
And let's have you answer this, please. Okay.
We
So
should
go
get a
ahead
lot of
and-
responses today, so I'm excited about these polls.
Yeah.
And this first one, I think you guys are going to find pretty interesting. It may not be what you think. So I'll go ahead and give this just a couple more seconds. The poll should be on your screen. All right, I'm going to close this out here pretty soon. 3, 2, 1.
Let's take a look.
All right, I'm going to go ahead and share the results.
Wow.
Pretty interesting.
Yeah. Okay.
So for those of you who said that it increased, go ahead and put in the chat why. Let's hear some comments about why psychological safety in your organization increased during.
That's very encouraging.
It is.
52% say it's gone up.
Yep. We're talking about it. That's really interesting, right? Certainly a motivator to talk about it. Felipe says just awareness. So we're getting some awareness comments in the chat. It's opened up discussions, the demand to pull together and connect.
Higher empathy overall.
I think that that's true. I've seen that in my interactions, right? I'm with people all over the world every day, and I think it's been kind of neat to peek into people's lives, and people are at home, and so I think in many ways it's encouraged some of that.
Yeah.
More reassurance, more connectedness to whole self, whole life. That holistic idea of a worker is something we'll talk about today, and I think that that's very true.
We're definitely going to get into that. Okay, fantastic. Let's go to the next question.
Okay. And while I'm going to the next question, if you guys, why did it decrease?
Yeah.
For those of you who said that it decreased, go ahead and put that in the chat. I'm going to stop this share and I'm going to go to the next one.
Is increasing psychological safety a current priority in your organization for 2021? That's the next question. So it's up or down, yes or no?
While you guys are answering this one, I'll go back to some of the comments in the chat. The people who were checked out, dropped out, lack of trust in leadership, burnout, uncertainty, changing norms, opportunistic layoffs. That's interesting. Job security is more a concern, absent leadership. Really interesting to see how different organizations and different leaders responded to the same stimulus.
And it was pretty close to half and half.
Yeah.
Half went up, half went down.
Yep.
Which is absolutely fascinating, especially with this global audience, right?
Sure is. So I'm going to go ahead and close this out and I will share the results.
Okay. There we go.
There we go.
Okay.
That's
So
interesting, right?
Yeah. 3 out of 4 of you are saying it's a priority in 2021. Okay. So that gives us a baseline, right? We have some baseline to understand and it's global. So we have kind of a global perspective.
Yeah. Okay. And I would also say, if we asked another question and we said, is increasing psychological safety a current priority for you? I think we'd probably get 99% yes, right? So we can pretty much all agree, this is something that's important and this is why we're here. So I'll go ahead and take that off your screen.
Okay. Here's the last question. Using a scale from 1 to 10, how would you rate the overall level of psychological safety in your organization today? So we're going to give you a 10-point scale, and let's see what the distribution curve looks like. All right.
1 is low and 10 is high.
Yep.
So I'm going to go ahead and launch this one. How would you rate the overall level of psychological safety in your organization today?
Okay.
1 is low, meaning that it's poor. 10 is high, meaning that we have tremendous amount of psychological safety.
Yeah.
This is interesting. And again, as we're looking at these results, everyone, remember that we're a global audience. And so we have a tendency to think locally about our geography, but back up and understand we've got people all over the place answering these questions. So I'm going to go ahead and end this one.
Yep.
Share the results. And there we go.
Okay. So take a look at that distribution curve. That's fascinating.
Yeah.
Right. So what's our overall finding here, folks? So if you look at the distribution curve, it's almost a bell-shaped normal distribution curve, but it's skewing a little bit to the right, just a little bit, thankfully, right? Just a little bit, but you can see that we have a lot of opportunity. This really is an imperative for organizations around the world, is that we have got to shift the culture. We've got to transform the culture, and we've got to bring more psychological safety back into the organization. Okay, so let me just show you the overall agenda today. Why the exploding demand for psychological safety? And then we're going to go through 6 trends. And I won't slog through all of those right now. We're just going to go through all one by one. So let's get right into it. Why the exploding demand? Well, let's begin with what is psychological safety. We can define the concept in 5 words: an environment of rewarded vulnerability. And that may be some definition that you may want to commit to memory. It's an environment of rewarded vulnerability. We need vulnerability. We need to protect vulnerability for many, many reasons. So let me give you a few, and these are the big ones. So the biggest ones are that we need vulnerability in order to create an incubator or a sanctuary of inclusion. So we need it for inclusion, we need it for retention, and we need it for innovation. So we keep coming back to psychological safety as the core metric and core concept of culture. It's unavoidable. You can put everything else in place, but if the psychological safety is not there at the core, then we're still not healthy, we're still not vibrant, we're still not where we need to be in terms of meeting the needs of human beings. So that is why all roads take us back to psychological safety. Let's talk about psychological safety as the backbone of DEI. Now, in order to explain this, we need to go through the 4 stages. And some of you, probably most of you, have not gone through the 4 stages framework. So let me walk you through it very briefly. Psychological safety is a function of respect and permission, which you see here on the vertical and the horizontal axes. The first stage of psychological safety is inclusion safety. Inclusion safety means that you feel included, accepted, and a sense of belonging. It is the foundation. And the reason it is stage 1 is because globally, based on survey research, 92% of employees across the board say that's the first thing that they want and need. They need inclusion. So that's why it's stage 1. It's empirical. It is a universal pattern. Then we go to stage 2, which is learner safety. So stage 1 answers the question, do I belong? Stage 2, learner safety, answers the question, am I growing? Learner safety means it's safe to ask questions, give and receive feedback, experiment, even make mistakes, and you won't be punished or marginalized or embarrassed in doing so. That's learner safety, stage 2. Then we go to stage 3, contributor safety. Contributor safety is the next natural stage in the sequence, because what's the human instinct after you learn? To go use what you learn, to apply what you learn. So contributor safety means that you feel free and able to contribute your skills and abilities and knowledge and make a difference, participate in the value creation process. And most people have a deep-seated need to make a difference. That's stage 3. And then finally, we go to stage 4, the culminating stage, the highest stage, which we call challenger safety. Challenger safety means that you feel safe to challenge the status quo without retaliation or retribution, without jeopardizing your personal standing and reputation. Now, think about this. As we are moving through the stages, we are following a pattern of escalating vulnerability. It's one thing to be included, right? Stage 1, but it's something different to challenge the status quo. I am climbing a ladder of vulnerability, and I am also following the natural sequence of human needs. So what does this have to do with diversity, equity, and inclusion? Everything. Because the foundation of psychological safety is right here, inclusion safety. If you don't build the foundation, you don't pass go, and you can't just move ahead to the higher stages. So that first stage of inclusion safety is the foundation. It is delicate, it is dynamic, and the work is never done. So that is a brief overview of the 4 stages of psychological safety. Now, let's keep going. Let's talk about inclusion safety just a little bit more for those of you who are pursuing diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives. Here's the definition for stage 1 inclusion safety. Inclusion safety satisfies the basic human need to be included, accepted, and belong. It means it's not expensive to be yourself. You are accepted for who you are, including your unique attributes and defining characteristics. In order to create stage 1 inclusion safety in an organization, you must apply this principle. Worth precedes worthiness. We have to apply a worth test to each other, right, in the organization, on the team, whatever the social collective is, in order to maintain inclusion safety. If you apply a worthiness principle, you cannot create and sustain inclusion safety, because what you're saying is, based on whatever criteria, whether it's performance or gender or age or religion or ethnicity, you're not worthy. So therefore, you're not entitled to inclusion safety. What we're saying is that stage 1 inclusion safety is not earned, it is owed. Let me give you a personal example. So when I was a boy, I grew up in southern Colorado among the Navajo. The Navajo, as you may know, represent the second largest Native American tribe next to the Cherokee. I grew up with the Navajo as a boy. My father was a teacher among the Navajo. And in my childhood, the Navajo, they gave us inclusion safety. They accepted us. They welcomed us into their society. I could feel that very strongly as a child. At the same time, I could see enormous differences in culture, customs, and traditions. So inclusion safety does not neutralize or remove differences. It acknowledges and appreciates those differences based on a worth principle, not a worthiness principle. So I hope that helps you for those of you who are still struggling with stage 1 inclusion safety. Part of the trouble that we have in organizations or as human beings is that we tend to govern ourselves based on junk theories of superiority. I'm superior based on this factor, right? Let me give you some factors that we use. Look at all these factors. These factors we employ to make superiority claims. The problem is they're all false. You cannot invoke a claim of superiority based on any of these factors. If you do, it begins to destroy inclusion safety. So that is why we cannot apply a worthiness principle for stage 1. It has to be a worth principle. You are intrinsically, inherently valued as a human being. Okay?
Tim, I just want to jump in here real quick and get to a couple of these questions in the chat. David asked an interesting question. Aren't some employees treated as more worthy or worth more than others? The highly recruited engineer versus contract labor manning reception. This is a really interesting point. And one of the important things to note is that we're still talking about inclusion safety. When we're talking about inclusion safety, we see it as a moral obligation to include. Based on our common humanity, no other distinguishing characteristic are we going to base our decision on. It's going to be just, are you human and are you presenting me with harm? If you're human and you're not presenting me with harm, I'm morally obligated to include you. But that does not absolve us of the worthiness conversation down the road when we're talking about performance.
Sure.
And we may get to that, but that's an important distinction to make. We're not saying that everyone can contribute the same amount in any context and in any environment. That's not true. Of course, we have skills. we have hard skills, and we need to deliver value for the organization. But that's a conversation that we have down the road in stage 3, and we can talk a little bit more about that. Just wanted to clarify, David, because that's a great question, and I've seen that come up in the chat.
That's right. Worthiness tests will come,
Yeah.
but not in stage 1. Stage 1 is to create a sanctuary of inclusion based on a worth principle. And then we go to the domain of performance and worthiness as we move to higher levels, higher stages, right? Okay, let's talk about trend 2, government legislation and regulation. And we have to talk about Australia and Canada because they are leading the way. So for you Aussies out there and for you Canadians, we love you. And you are leading the way. You're the vanguard, right? So let's just summarize what's been happening. So in Canada, for example, and back in 2013, Canada introduced the national standard for psychological health and safety. The first one in the world like this. Now it's a voluntary standard, and it was meant to be kind of a starting point. And so you have to self-regulate based on the standard. Why are they putting the standard? Why did they put the standard in place? Well, 21% of working Canadians suffer mental health problems and illnesses. So think about, that's similar statistics will be true across the world. So you can see the starting point. And if you read through the standard, it's actually quite amazing. And it's a progression, right? We're starting there. This one is based on 13 factors, including culture, workload, and engagement. And this will continue to evolve. Okay, let's talk about Australia for a minute. Australia in 2011 published the Model Work Health and Safety, Act. It consists of the Act, the regulations, and the codes of practice. And then it has to be accepted or approved by each jurisdiction, whether you're in a state or a province, right? The goal of the work health and safety law has been to provide a nationally consistent framework and standard of health and safety protection for Australian workers. Now, again, it's similar with the Canadian regulation. Health is now defined in a holistic way. It is both physical and psychological. And so hazard categories are defined as environmental and organizational. And I'm going to get to that when we talk about safety. So what we're seeing now is the integration of the concept of health and safety. It is now becoming holistic, right? So we're off to a good start. We've got some things going. For example, with the Australian law, they keep passing amendments. They passed amendments in 2019. So this is ongoing. It's an evolution. But I thought it would be interesting to just discuss what these two nations are doing. And I think we're going to see similar activity in other countries around the world. So that's just a little overview.
And Tim, I want to call out our friends in the UK as well.
Yeah.
I think their standard, you guys are going to have to help me in the chat, but their new standard, what is it, 45003? It's probably in the chat somewhere, but that's going to be coming soon. Let me see if anyone's answered this already. But we're seeing this more and more, and it's not going to go away, right? No. Yeah. Due out July.
Yeah, 45003. And we're gonna keep track of that, right? That ISO standard. So fantastic, and thanks for your input. We've got to stay abreast of what's going on worldwide. We're going to see much more activity in this category as we move through this decade. This is the decade of culture, is it not? Okay, trend 4, a holistic approach to workplace wellness. Let's talk about workplace wellness, for example. If safety is about prevention, then we would say wellness is about promotion, programming, and resources. So what do we do in wellness? Wellness is now becoming this holistic, integrated concept. And what we did here is we simply tried to synthesize uh, many of the very common programs and initiatives that we see in wellness. So let me ask you, let's just put a question to everybody out there. Do you have a formal wellness program in your organization, or are you planning to start one? That's number one. Okay. Is it integrated? Is it holistic? Okay. Okay. Now I'm going to ask you a tougher question. What is the hardest thing about pursuing wellness in your experience so far? What is the hardest thing? What is the biggest barrier or obstacle?
We've got remote working in there, and don't worry about trend three. We're going to talk about that. How has the pandemic affected all of this? It
Yeah.
certainly has. But we're getting a lot of remote working in here. Old school leadership, cost, work life balance demands, balance, people knowing what's available to them. That simple piece of education is often underdone, just letting people know what is available to them. Stigma and perception,
Mhm.
not believing in the importance, competitiveness, admitting vulnerability, using 1900s principles.
That's a
A
good
lot
one.
of us have a common experience there, especially when we're looking at these archaic ways of doing things, these patterns and trends that have seeped into the 21st century.
Yeah. Yeah. Stuck in past practices.
Control and command.
Yeah.
These are good comments, guys.
Yeah. Fantastic. Fantastic. Okay. 5, workplace safety. Now, let's realize that workplace wellness and workplace safety are connected, but they represent two different efforts that have evolved over time. So let's think about this. So we're going to link the two, okay? But let me just mention, so early in my career, I was a plant manager in a large manufacturing plant. I had 3,000 employees, had 500 managers, and then another 2,500 workers. We looked at safety. Safety was a religion, and we preached it every day. But the traditional approach to safety was environmental, which you see on the left. And we have the 4 traditional categories of hazard. So we had biological hazards, chemical hazards, ergonomic hazards, and physical hazards. That was the world of safety that we knew. And that was the world of safety that had evolved from the Industrial Revolution. What has changed? Much has changed because we have now brought in a new category of hazard that we now call organizational and psychosocial hazard. These are things that can cause mental and or emotional harm. So what are we talking about? We're talking about things like the demands of your job, the control that you have over your job, sources of support, role clarity, organizational change management, recognition and reward. So this is a newly adopted category of hazard that we traditionally have not acknowledged. So I want you to think about this. So for those of you for whom safety is a priority, have you adopted the organizational psychosocial category of hazard? Are you doing this? Are you taking an integrated approach? Okay. Say, Nancy says we're in the 4th industrial revolution. The changes are huge. They are. They are huge. Okay.
I also want to call out for our LinkedIn Live audience, anybody who's joining us outside Zoom, go ahead and feel free to respond in the chat as well. We're monitoring that too.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Fantastic. Okay. Now I'm going to ask you another question. What is the relationship between psychological safety and physical safety? How does psychological safety enhance or increase your ability to create a safer physical environment? What's the connection? Do you see the connection? Okay. What if you're in a traditional command and control environment, fear and intimidation environment, maybe even a toxic environment? How does that affect your ability to do continuous improvement for physical safety?
We're getting a lot of comments in here about speaking up, right?
Yes.
And of course, that's definitely the first place we're going to go. I think it's really interesting, Tim, to your point about command and control. Guys, what do we do if I raise my hand and I say, "Hey, I think there's a problem here. We've got a real issue," and I get slapped on the wrist for it? What am I going to do the next time I see something? The next time I see a problem,
Mhm.
am I going to bring it up? Probably not.
Right. So this takes us back to the studies on psychological safety that have been done with healthcare clinical teams.
Yep.
Now, many of you know the findings from these studies. Let me just repeat the question. If you're working as a member of a healthcare clinical team, you may be a doctor, you may be a nurse, you may be a therapist, whatever your role is. If you make a mistake and you're on a team with low psychological safety, what do you do? What are you tempted to do? Right? Psychological safety is low. There we go. We're going to hide it. And if it's visible, then we may blame, right? But if it's not visible, so the pattern is that we hide. Now, what is the problem with hiding? Mistakes are the clinical material that we have for the team to learn. And so if we're not bringing that clinical material back to the team where we can analyze it and collaborate as we try to problem solve and come up with new solutions, we're not getting better. So you see the unintended consequences of hiding become very profound and far reaching. So we need an environment. And as you can see, in a safety environment, what are we looking for? We're constantly looking for hazards. That's what we do. We're looking for these biological, chemical, ergonomic, physical hazards. But now we're looking for the organizational and the psychosocial hazards. And then we're trying to mitigate risk by removing the hazards. The only way we can do this is as a team. This can't be a top-down exercise. We have to democratize our ability to create a safe environment. That's what we're talking about. So we have to democratize this ability. Any other comments, Junior, coming in?
Tons. And we've got, several hundred, I think, watching on YouTube and LinkedIn. So just know, guys, we're keeping an eye on that too. And we're trying to pull in that chat as much as possible.
Yep.
So just so you guys know that.
Okay, fantastic. Let's just talk about one more implication. Think about this. An emotionally bruised worker, and that's what low psychological safety does, creates a cognitively impaired worker. Think about that relationship. So if the worker is emotionally bruised, he or she is not going to be able to work and to think at full capacity. So they are compromised in their ability to contribute, in their ability to participate, in their ability to think and to collaborate. Very, very important. Because in the learning process, the cognitive track and the emotional track are interwoven. They cannot be detached one from another, right?
I think we can all point out instances in our own lives and journeys, as far back as we can remember, where we've been emotionally bruised, right? Some of those may be subtle instances, some of them may be acute and very severe. And there are long-lasting effects from those types of experiences. And we take those things with us. And I think we can look back and see, were we impaired in some way after a situation like that? Yeah, I know that that's happened to me, especially in learning environments where we might put ourselves out there and take a little bit of a risk. And as we talked about in the beginning, that risk or that vulnerability may have been punished. And certainly that affects our behavior moving forward. And sometimes these can have long lasting effects. If this happens frequently enough, for long enough, it can have devastating impact, especially when we talk about organizations as a whole. And we talk about this often, the lost productivity, the lost value, the true cost that happens and is incurred when we have emotionally bruised workers in the environment trying to do their best for the organization.
Yeah.
Is that going to have an impact on productivity? Certainly. Is it going to have an impact on the levels of innovation? Absolutely. So we can see these things happen over time, and there's a lot of research to back it.
Yeah, Lauren makes a point. She said, well, that's true individually, but what happens when it becomes a pattern?
Yeah.
It becomes cultural or systemic in the organization. Wow.
Yeah.
Well, at that point, it can become catastrophic in terms of the costs, right, and the unintended consequences. One of the case studies that I bring up in the book, for those of you who are not familiar, is that in the United States, at least, a student drops out of high school every 26 seconds. Now, that's a profound statistic. But what we know upon further research is that, barring a legitimate learning disability, most of these students can do the work. The reason they drop out is because they fall behind. They don't have the support. They don't have the encouragement. They lose confidence and they call it quits. That is a tragedy. Is it any different with adult professionals, with adult learners? No, it's the same. These are the same principles. They apply uniformly across cohorts. Okay, so let's talk about trend 6, Gen X and Gen Z expectations. And I want to have a discussion. I want to have a dialogue with you on this, because this is massively important to our trajectory and what we're seeing in the world today. Here's the question. What are the new expectations of Gen X and Gen Z when it comes to psychological safety? What are you seeing? You may be a Gen X or a Gen Z. Think about yourself, but also think about your colleagues. What are the expectations?
Go ahead and put that in the chat.
Yeah, put it in the chat.
Autonomy, learning, growing, connection to purpose. Taylor Sims, freedom of expression. They take for granted they will have it. It's part of them and how they work. Work to live, not live to work. It's expected. It's always been a part of their life. Feedback, variety, prioritize individual humanity. Feel free to speak out. Lisa, overwhelmed by information but don't realize it. Mary, thank you. Dana, willingness to move on quickly. Social responsibility.
Yeah.
Feedback and immediate gratification. These are interesting comments.
Gen X is relationship based. I like that.
Mm.
That's a very interesting observation.
Yeah. Expectation to be included in solutions. Marcia, thank you.
Yeah.
Expect them to not be tied to a job for life. They will flee your job in search of one that fits their agenda.
Yeah.
That's really interesting.
Yeah.
These are great comments, everyone.
Fantastic.
Yeah, thank you for participating in the chat.
See, I think this is what we're seeing, everybody. We're seeing Gen X and Gen Z pouring, these massive cohorts pouring into the workforce, and they look upon psychological safety as a term of employment. They look at it as a given, an expectation. And if it's not there, especially with your most talented, they're going to bounce, right?
Can I talk about that for just a second?
Yeah, go ahead, Junior.
I think it's a really interesting point. And we've seen this again and again in organizations, particularly fast-growing, high-paced, high-talent organizations. When you have a high performer come in, and it's not causal that they're part of this generation, but perhaps there's some correlation. If you have a high performer come in with the expectation that psychological safety is a term of employment, and they're assuming that that's going to be part of their experience, if it's not there, what do? I think now more than ever, they have a tendency to say, see you later, and not put up with it. And so we see organizations bleed out their top talent, and it is a sad sight, and it comes at a high price.
It does.
They could retain that talent, they could engage that talent, pull out the discretionary effort of those people with a psychologically safe environment. But if that's not there, they're not going to tolerate it. And the interesting pattern among the high performers is they have options. They have places to go. Not always, but in many cases. And they'll say, well, that's nice, appreciate my experience, but I'm going to go over here because I think that it's going to be a better environment. So we've seen a shift that way. I think that it's always happened, but I think that it's happening more now than ever. There's probably less tolerance for psychological safety, for an absence or a lack of psychological safety than there ever has been.
Yeah. Another theme that's coming through the chat, Junior, is that some of the members of Gen X and Gen Z didn't arrive with the level of resilience they needed, right? Yeah. And then here we have the pandemic that hits us so hard.
Yeah.
That may be true. Okay, well, then that begs the question, how do we cultivate that resilience, which is in demand right now?
Yeah.
Right. And will be for the duration of 2021.
Yeah.
Right. So again, how do we cultivate that? Psychological safety is part of that equation.
Yeah, it is. I think so much of it is early on in career, having opportunity to fail and having opportunity to move forward and learn after that failure. So the learner safety in this equation is incredibly important, so that when we make mistakes, which we inevitably will, we learn from those mistakes and develop that resilience over time. And there's a level of resilience that we all need to come with that's just basic. And that's a big question, right? How do we increase the level overall in the workforce? It's a big question, but psychological safety plays a big role.
Yeah. Yeah, that's very true. Very, very true. Okay. So let's just talk about, we'll kind of summarize here. And I want you to think about this. I want you to think about cracking yourselves open as individuals. And let's think about this. The single most important factor in creating psychological safety is your modeling behavior. Remember, you either lead the way or get in the way. You cannot be a neutral party. Now, you may be in a formal managerial role. You may be in an independent contributor role. It doesn't matter. You're still an architect of the culture. All of us, every single one of us, we radiate influence to each other every day. And there's no off switch for that radiation. So the switch is always on. The influence is always working. The only question is, what is the nature of the influence, right? Are we nurturing psychological safety or are we not? That's really the question. So psychological safety, we really need to begin at the individual level with some self-reflection. And it does come down to behaviors. And then, of course, the attitudes and the beliefs that drive those behaviors. But we have to think about our behavioral patterns. Do we have bias? Do we have prejudice? Yes, we do. Humans drip with bias. A bias is a preference. Some biases are positive. Some are negative. For example, I love Korean cuisine. That's a bias. That's a great bias. And if you were with me, I would take you out and we'd have some Korean barbecue. But I may have some negative biases as well, right? Some are conscious, some are unconscious. And so we need to solicit feedback. We really need to do some self-introspection, some reflection at an individual level. And then we go from there. Junior, any comments on that?
Yeah, this is one of the most important things that we're going to talk about today. When we're talking about psychological safety, I don't know if it's a tendency, but it's very easy for us to point fingers and say this boss or this person or my team or this environment or this country or whatever the context might be is psychologically unsafe, and this is the problem and this is what other people need to do. If we all can take some ownership for the level of psychological safety in our immediate environment, man, we can make a big difference. And we need to. And behaviorally, there are some very simple things that we can do to improve psychological safety across all of the four stages. We've got a couple of our team members monitoring the chat. So, Ben, if you'll throw a link to the behavioral guide in the chat, that's a free resource that I'd like to share with you that has probably close to 150 practical behaviors that you can look at to improve psych safety in each of the four stages. It could be something like weigh in last at a meeting, leave your phone in your office. Very simple things that we can do, and you're welcome to share this with others as well. We found this to be very helpful with our team and our clients and the work that we do, and want to make that available to you. So Ben will put a link to that in the chat, and we'll also make sure that that goes out in the recording. We'll make this recording, this entire session will be available to you for free, of course, in a post webinar email that we'll send out that will have links to some of these resources. So it's something that I've been doing recently. I'm a manager like many of you. I manage a team, and it's helped so much to have open conversation and dialogue about these behaviors. And it's made me reflect and say, what am I doing regarding, inclusion? What am I doing in learner safety? When we talk about emotionally bruised learners, am I the one doing any bruising? Certainly it's happened to me, but am I doing it? And so flipping it and looking at it through that lens, I think, can be very beneficial to all of us as we have these conversations about psychological safety.
Yeah. There's one other trend I want to talk about, Junior, for just a minute. And this is
Yeah.
absolutely fascinating. We are starting to see the beginnings of a trend with HR departments where they are formally incorporating psychological safety as a selection criterion
Yeah.
for promotion to management.
Yeah.
And I want to ask you, for all of you who are with us today, is this happening in your organization yet, where it is formally being brought in? So, for example, in many organizations, how do we promote people into management? On the strength of their performance as an individual contributor, right?
Yeah.
That's the prevailing pattern. But to what extent are we saying, do you have a demonstrated track record of creating psychological safety for those around you? And what some organizations are doing now is they are saying, if you don't have that demonstrated track record of creating psychological safety, you are not yet eligible for promotion to management. Now, think about that. Hardwiring that in as a selection criterion for promotion. We are starting to see that. That is an amazing thing. Any comments on that?
We've got a lot in the chat. A lot of people saying, no, that's not a part of what we're doing, but it should be.
Yeah.
I agree with that. And I had a conversation just yesterday with a higher education institution in the United States talking about this very thing. And it's something that we run into a lot. And it's something that we run into a lot with large organizations, particularly large multinationals that have been around for a while. We see that old style of leadership continue to be perpetuated. And in sales organizations, you can predict some of these environments where this happens frequently. And we're definitely seeing a shift and seeing organizations say, you know what? There's something going on here.
Yeah.
We're perpetuating this problem, and there's a real opportunity to look at some other criteria that we have not looked at before, because the strength of performance as an individual contributor, Now, it's much less correlated to managerial effectiveness than we think, if
It
it's
is.
correlated at all.
It is, because the nature of your contribution shifts, right, everyone? You know this. When you're an individual contributor, you're contributing individually and directly.
Yeah.
You move into management and it shifts from direct to indirect contribution. If you haven't made the psychological transition from direct to indirect contribution, you're really going to struggle. You have to be able to rejoice in the success of your people. So it only makes sense, though. Otherwise, we're taking an enormous risk if we promote someone to be a leader, a formal manager, but they have not demonstrated the ability to create psychological safety. So it's just something that I wanted to bring up because we're starting to see this, and I think we're going to see a lot of momentum behind this shift, this incorporation of this criterion as we move through the decade, right? Junior, do you want to say anything about the 4 stages team survey? And
Sure.
then we'll
Yeah.
wrap up.
Couple things I'll mention as we're wrapping up. If you're not aware, Leader Factor does a lot of work in the area of psychological safety. For those of you who are new to us, I just want to tell you what we're doing. We offer a certification in the 4 stages of psychological safety that you can use inside a corporation or as a third-party consultant. So if you want to check that out, it's on our website. I think we've got probably 10 seats left for the March training. I don't think that one's sold out yet, but those go pretty quick. For you broadly, if you have not read the book, I would highly encourage you to burn through this thing. It shouldn't take you very much time at all. It's pretty thin. So pick up a copy if you have not yet. And if you have and you liked it, go ahead and leave us a review on Amazon. We do these webinars about every 2, 3, sometimes 4 weeks. So we're doing them very regularly to keep everyone apprised what's going on in the area of psychological safety. And we pick niche topics every time. So we would encourage you to keep an eye out for the future webinars that we do. We would love to have you back. As you saw at the beginning, many attending today have been in past webinars, and we hope to continue bringing value to you. That is the primary reason we do these webinars, is to deliver value for you, to give you different things to think about, hopefully provoke a light bulb moment. And we want to keep you involved. We want to keep you aware of everything going on. And so if you want to give us a follow on LinkedIn, that's a great place to do it. That's probably the best place to do it. We'll be sending out emails to keep you aware of these things. The 4 stages team survey is a platform that Leader Factor has built to measure psychological safety based on the 4 stages. You can learn more about it on the website. It's something that you get admin access to through the certification. So something to make you aware of. I think that is just about it. And the last, Tim, go ahead.
Well, I wanted to ask one question because some of you noticed that I didn't address trend 3, and I was going to wait till the end.
Yeah.
We're going to talk about the devastating effects of the pandemic on psychological safety. And I just wanted to do this as a question, so I thought I would drop it down to the bottom. So here's the question. What kind of negative or adverse effects are you seeing on psychological safety from the pandemic? So what are the effects and how is this affecting your organization? So for those of you who can stay with us, we just want to talk about this this question for just a minute.
And we've got a giveaway. So
yep. And then we got a giveaway.
Don't leave quite yet.
Yep.
We'll keep you around till the top of the hour, and then I'll tell you about the giveaway because you have an opportunity to win a free book.
Yep. Anxiety, disengagement, isolation, greater fear, exhaustion, right? Now we have to prepare for the likelihood that this is going to continue for a while.
Yeah.
And so we need to change some of our patterns in outreach, in touch points, in engagement, in building psychological safety remotely, virtually, right? Please consult the behavioral guide for help here, because there are 140 concrete behaviors in the guide that will help you.
Yep. So with that, we're going to wrap up. Here's the giveaway. If you enjoyed the webinar today, we would appreciate you sharing it. The way that you can do that is tag a colleague in the Leader Factor post of the webinar. So there will be a post after the LinkedIn Live ends that will be a recording of this webinar. We'll include this giveaway information in the post-webinar email as well. But if you tag a colleague that you think might be interested in this content and keeping tabs on what we're doing in psychological safety, go ahead and comment them in on the LinkedIn post. That will enter you to win a copy of a free copy of the book. We're going to be giving away digital copies. And so I think we'll choose probably 5 to 10 in that thread. So go ahead and do that. Once again, thank you for being here. We appreciate you. Thank you for spending an hour with us today. It's been a pleasure for us. We love doing these webinars, and we appreciate everything that you all are doing inside your organizations, inside your families, all of the social collectives of which you are a part. Thank you for doing good in the world. We want to be a part of that. We're here to help you in that process. So if you need anything from us, don't hesitate to reach out. So from my end, thank you so much. Tim, any parting words?
Thank you so much. It's been great to be with you. Thank you for caring about humanity. That's why we're here.
Yeah. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you next time.